Well, welcome again. Glad that you are all here. Obviously, I am not Pastor Adam. So if you came here thinking you were getting Pastor Adam, I apologize. But hopefully, we'll learn a few things together this morning. Pastor Adam, hopefully, has had a good week. This is vacation week for him. I think he might actually be in the air flying home right now. So anyway, that's what's going on with him. So in a minute, we'll pray. And we just want to lift up prayers for the Eshbaugh family as they travel, and just hopefully they come back feeling refreshed and revived. They absolutely deserve it. So we're going to continue in our series on 2 Kings this morning, and we're going to be reading about the story of a guy named Naaman. Has anybody heard that story before? Is it familiar? I think it's a relatively well-known text. So you might be familiar with it. It's where Naaman is healed of his leprosy. But hopefully as we kind of walk through it this morning, we're going to pick up on a few things that maybe you didn't see before. And then we can walk out of here with some application for our lives. So Jesus actually talks about the text that we're going to be looking at this morning in Luke chapter 4. There was a scene where Jesus visits his hometown, and he's really not doing a lot of miracles in this place, and he actually acknowledges the disbelief of the people from his hometown, and he actually talks about Naaman in that text, and he says, you know, there were many in Israel during the time of Elisha the prophet who had leprosy, but they didn't receive healing. Naaman received healing. So that gives us some clues of what we're going to talk about. Jesus is preaching this message to us in that passage. We're going to learn that this is a story about a man who was an outsider. He's not a Jewish person. He's not an Israelite. He's a Gentile who finds the Lord when God's own people have rejected him. But what we're really going to get into this morning is the how. Right? How does Naaman get to the place where he receives healing from leprosy? And as we consider the text that we're going to get into this morning, I think we're going to see that Naaman's leprosy is like part of the problem, right? It's the symptom. It's the thing that we see. It's like the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. But there's a whole lot more that God intends to do in Naaman's life. We're going to see that he actually moves from a place of seeking like physical healing from this skin disease, this skin condition, to a place of actually finding God himself and taking, not just finding God, but taking hold of the inheritance that God has promised for his people. And I think we're also going to see that Naaman's going to get in his own way a little bit, right? He's going to make things more difficult for himself than they need to be in his faith journey. But he's going to get a little help from the people around him as he works out his faith, and that's going to be another point of application for us as he wrestles through this process. So I want to take a minute and read 2 Kings together, chapter 5, not all of 2 Kings, just chapter 5. And we're just going to be in the first 19 verses. So there's actually a lot more to this chapter that we're not going to get into this morning because of time. So as always, encourage you to go back and take a look at the whole thing later this week. But we're just going to be in the first 19 verses. But before I read, I just want to take a minute and pray, because I am like the grand master of getting in my own way, and I just want to pray to God that I don't do that this morning, and that I simply give you what the Word says and what the Spirit is wanting to teach this morning. So would you pray with me? Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for your Word. I thank you for the reality that you are willing to come into our mess with healing, with mercy, with grace, with love. And I thank you that you want to give us more than physical healing. God, you are after our heart. You want to give us an inheritance. I pray that we would see that today. I pray, Father, that you would teach us through your word, that that if there is anything that I had planned for this morning to share that is not from you, then I pray that it would just be forgotten from this time. And Lord, I just pray that you would direct and guide us. I pray for Adam and Rach and the boys, Father, that as they travel this morning and today, that you would just give them safety and in their trip. And I just pray for their rest as they resettle back into a week ahead. And Lord, I just pray that you would just restore them through this time. And Lord, we just thank you for the day. Just pray your blessing on our gathering this morning. Amen. All right, well, with that, we're going to be in, again, 2 Kings chapter 5. Again, the first 19 verses. I apologize, this is actually a lot of verses. So you're going to be listening to me reading for a minute, but hopefully you could follow along on the screen, and it will sink deep in as we read it together. All right. Now, Naaman was a commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now, bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, she would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me?" When Elisha, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all of his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other God but the Lord. May the Lord forgive your servants for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. Go in peace, Elisha said. As Adam always says, the word of God for the people of God. And as we try to make sense of this passage, I think that there's a lot of pretty obvious things that are going on. There's nothing in the text here that is just cryptic or weird. We've had a lot of that going on, right, in the weeks leading up to this service throughout our time in 2 Kings. So I think a lot of it is going to be pretty clear for us. But as I try to make sense of this passage, there are really four main story arcs that stand out to me. There's this crisis that Naaman is experiencing, right? I mean, he has this leprosy problem. There's a solution that is going to be offered to him. And then we see that Naaman kind of wrestles through some stuff. He has this little bit of an inner conflict. And then ultimately we see his healing. So we're going to walk through each of these different sections of this text. And hopefully we'll find some things that we can take away from it. So we're going to start with the crisis. What's the crisis that Naaman is experiencing in this passage? Well, in the opening verse, we read or we learn a lot about who Naaman is, right? We see that he's a great man. We see that he's highly regarded. We actually read that he's been given military success, not by anybody, not by his power or his might or by his army. Did you notice what it says in the scriptures? He's been given success by the Lord, by Yahweh, the God of Israel. The great I Am has divinely given Naaman this military success. And we're also told that Naaman was a valiant soldier. And if you've ever filled out a resume for a job, and I know some of us have recently, but if you've ever filled out a resume for a job, this is what you do, right? I mean, you put your best self forward. You say all of the things that cast you in a positive light. You list your talents, your accomplishments, your skills, your character qualities, and that's what the writer of 2 Kings does for us, right? He gives us this great resume for who Naaman is. And what more could you want if somebody was going to describe your life? Except right at the end of this description, in verse 1, we get this nasty little 3-letter word, but, right? He has all this, but he has leprosy. And that takes everything that we have just read about Naaman, and it puts this asterisk on it. And it tells us that his story is about to take a turn. Now, Naaman's not an Israelite, right? So if you've read the Old Testament, you know about laws for ritual purity and cleansing for the Israelite. He is not an Israelite. So he is not in the family of God. He is not under these laws for ritual purity. But the fact that he has leprosy, it carries with it the reality that Naaman is unclean. Not just physically unclean, but spiritually unclean. We know as a reader that this is true of him. And this would have been symbolic for Naaman of his separation from God. Not just his separation from God, but ultimately it was a reality that would have separated him and isolated him from community. Now, I know we're only one verse into the story at this point, but can you start to see yourself yet? Can you start to see yourself in this story? The fact that so many times in our lives we can list all of the ways that things are going well, right? This is the whole premise behind social media. We present our best self to the world, but underneath, on the inside, behind the scenes, we might be battling something in our life. And maybe like Naaman, it's a physical thing. Maybe like Naaman, it's this physical thing. It's in plain sight. It's obvious to all who see. But maybe it's deep in your heart. Maybe it's tucked away. Maybe it's this thing on the inside that you are battling with in your private life. And I think because what Naaman is experiencing in this text, and as the story continues, I'm convinced that this isn't about Naaman's leprosy. I am convinced that it is about the things that we are afflicted with that keep us from experiencing peace and wholeness and from experiencing God himself. And as we continue in the story, I think we're going to see that a solution is going to be offered to Naaman, and it's going to come from an unlikely source. So, 2 Kings, this next section is going to be chapter 5, verses 2 through 10. And in the opening verse, we learn that Naaman was the commander of the army of Aram, and we've heard about this nation before, right? If you've been with us since the beginning of the First Kings series and into 2 Kings, we've heard this nation before, and we know from this series that this is a nation that has been at conflict pretty regularly with the people of God, with the nation of Israel, as far back as David and Solomon's reign. And next week, when Adam teaches on chapter 6, we're going to see that Aram and Israel are at full-blown war with one another. So there is tension between these two nations. And we get a clue from the text about the current state of things because we learn that Naaman's wife has a servant who is a captive young girl from Israel who had been taken during a raid. Now, she is, for all intents and purposes, a slave in this household. She is not there by choice. She did not apply with her great resume for this job. She was taken, and she is forced to be in this place. And this is a narrative, this idea of slavery, this is a narrative that is so core to the identity of God's people, right? I mean, they know what this means. They were slaves in Egypt. They were set free by a miraculous work of God, and they were delivered through the waters of the sea, through the wilderness, through wandering, and into a promised land. This is a story that we see over and over again in the scriptures, and it's one that we see again this morning. And as I read this story, as I see about this, read about this slave girl in this household, I actually want to read about her freedom. This is, you start to read and you're like, oh, I hope this is what happens. We don't read about that. We don't read about her deliverance in this story. But what we see is a young girl who is a slave extending a hand of mercy to her master in order that he might be set free from his affliction. And that is astonishing. She tells Naaman's wife about this prophet in Israel who can help. We know him to be Elisha. And we don't know what her motives are. She might be hoping to gain favor and maybe her freedom, or maybe she's simply a faithful servant of God extending mercy to her enemy. And regardless of her motivation, this is what she does. And without this act of kindness, without this act of mercy, this is where the story ends. It ends right here. So here's a challenge for us. Who in your life needs a hand of mercy? Maybe even someone who has wronged you. Maybe even an enemy. How might God be calling you to extend his grace, not because the person deserves it, but because God is merciful? So, as the story continues, we see Naaman take this first step of faith. Perhaps it's out of sheer desperation. He's probably tried many other means of healing without success. So Naaman, he seeks permission for the king of Aram to go to the prophet in Israel. And the king sends him along with a letter and this massive offering with gold and silver and 10 sets of clothes. And this would have been an offering of great value it would have been upwards of over $6 million by today's economic reality. And it's the price that Naaman is willing to pay in order to be healed. It's the price that Naaman expects to pay to be healed. And on some level, I think it's the price that Naaman thinks that he can pay in order to be healed. So the king, he receives this letter, he receives Naaman, and the first thing he does is he tears his robes in panic, knowing that he has no power to actually heal this man. But Elisha hears about what the king does. He hears about the king's distress, and he essentially says, all right, it's fine, send him to me. So Naaman goes. He goes to Elisha, and do you catch the manner in which he goes? He goes to Elisha's house with his horses and his chariots and all of his attendants, and he stops at the door. Regularly, as I'm reading this passage, I'm constantly thinking about the Exodus story. When I think about the Exodus story, when I think about horses and chariots, I think about Pharaoh, right? I think about Pharaoh's great might and his power and his army, which would have been signified by his horses and chariots. This is the manner in which this man approaches the prophet to be healed. He approaches in great might and power, yet in reality, he is powerless to do anything about his affliction. I love the way this unfolds. I love that Elisha does not go out himself. He just says, I'm going to send a messenger to deal with this guy. And we see that this kind of gets under Naaman's skin, right? He gets very upset about this. He expected the prophet himself. He expected Elisha himself to come out, and not just to come out, but to do the grand thing, to wave his hand over the spot, to call out to the Lord in this flashy way to heal him of his leprosy. After all, wasn't Naaman worth it? He's this great military leader. He comes with great wealth and might and power. But he gets a messenger, and the messenger tells him to wash in the Jordan 7 times, and his flesh will be restored, and that he will be cleansed. Now, this is significant. We know that when we read the number 7 in the Bible, it means something, right? And it so often, sometimes it's just the number 7, but most of the times, it means fullness, completeness, perfection. And Naaman is told to wash in this way, to wash fully. It was to be an act of obedience, an act of faith that was to be complete in order for him to experience this healing. And it would result in a healing that was complete for him, not just physical, but we'll see that it would be spiritual as well. And Naaman is also told to wash in the Jordan River. And this would be significant as well, because it is through the Jordan that Joshua leads God's people into the promised land to take a hold of an inheritance. What a great way to foreshadow what is ultimately taking place here. And Naaman is also told that his washing is going to result in 2 distinct things. First, it is going to result in the restoration of his flesh. That's important. It's so important to Naaman, but it's not ultimate. He's also told that he will experience cleansing. And this gets to the heart of Naaman's great need. His body needs to be healed for sure, and certainly God is willing to do this. But cleansing, this is another thing altogether. So what does this mean, right? What does this mean for Naaman? What does it mean for us? Well, I think we can apply this in a couple of different ways. First, I think this washing 7 times in the Jordan, it was to be a complete act of faith on Naaman's part. If he were to wash 3 times, if he were to wash 6 times, if he were to wash 8 times, I think the leprosy would have remained. It was to be 7. No more than that. No less than that. And this tells me that Naaman needed a faith that activated him to obey God. And it would be in his obedience and his submission to God that he would find his healing. He could not offer less than that, but he cannot offer more either. There is nothing that he could add to what God was willing to do in order to bring about this healing. He is powerless on his own, and despite his gold, his silver, his clothes, his chariots, his horses, his attendants, he has nothing to offer. He must be cleansed by God alone through faith. But more than that, the healing of Naaman's leprosy alone would have been incomplete. He needed a healing that was beyond his flesh. He needed cleansing and restoration before God. This is the washing that he really needed. This is the washing that we really need. Now, I want to be careful here because I think there is an application for us to consider, but I want to make sure that we process it in the right gospel context. And here's the application that I want us to consider. Where is God calling you and me to wash completely in the gospel and in obedience in our life? To not hold back. You know, we tend to give God parts of our life, right? We tend to give God 6 parts of our life, but not 7. And I don't ask this to imply that we offer some complete work of faith in order that we might be healed. We can't do that. It's not ultimately on us. I'm just drawn to the reality in this text that as we walk with Jesus, sometimes we hold back areas of our life that keep us from experiencing peace. And that's what I want us to consider in this moment. Not that we heal ourselves, but that we miss out on God's peace when we hold back in faith and obedience. Here is the reality of this text for all of us. We all come to God with this resume like Naaman's. We have gifting, we have strengths, we have success in various areas of life. Maybe we've even had the success of our peers, or success and the admiration of our peers, but we're all afflicted. We're all afflicted, and we are all unclean. And we all need to wash in the only source of water that can bring true life and healing. So we've seen Naaman's crisis. We've seen the solution that was offered to him. And now we're at this place of conflict in the story. Every good story has to have conflict. And in this story, Naaman's conflict is between Naaman and Naaman. And the writer tells us that Naaman is angry. And we need to ask why. Because Naaman has just received the best news, right? And I think this is where we see Naaman kind of getting in his own way in the story and making things so much more complicated than they need to be. And it's because Naaman, in this moment, is doing battle. He's a military leader, so he's used to doing battle. He's doing battle with his pride. We've already talked about how he expected Elisha, the prophet himself, and how he expected this extravagant spectacle of healing, that the prophet would stand over him and do this miraculous thing. And and he goes on to compare the Jordan River. You catch that with the waters of Damascus. He's kind of looking down on this solution. He's looking at the great rivers and waters of Damascus, of his people. And the text tells us that he went off in a rage. And it seems to me that in this moment, Naaman has to overcome a high view of himself, or at least his expectation of some great thing that is due him, in order to submit to this very simple thing, this very small thing. Naaman needs to be humbled before he can be healed. And don't we do the same thing in the relationship to the gospel? You know, God has extended this gift of grace and mercy and washing through the water, which is faith in the blood of Jesus. And while it came at a great cost for God himself, for us it is this simple thing, right? It's not an easy thing, but it's a simple thing. It's this free gift that we can't earn and we don't deserve and we can't pay for it. I grew up in a church tradition where I very much believed in God. And I genuinely believed that I could only be accepted by God if I prayed a certain way and if I lived a certain way. And those are good things, but they're not ultimate things. And it was not true. I was pretty self-aware as a young person. I knew my sin. I knew that I wasn't up to the standard. And that ultimately left me feeling like pretty helpless, pretty like almost like fearful of God. I was like, all right, I know I got to pray a certain way, live a certain way. I know I can't do it. So I was a young, not believer, but like, in this kind of sphere of faith. And I was just afraid. So I just kind of stuffed the gospel, not the gospel. I stuffed, all this God stuff. And it wasn't until I was in college that I heard the gospel for the very first time in its simplicity, in a way that answered all of the fears that I had growing up. And I didn't respond to this simple message in anger like Naaman did, right? I responded in disbelief. For me, it was disbelief. That was the barrier for me. And I was like, how could I possibly be accepted? How could I possibly be forgiven? God, you don't know me. You don't know what I've done, right? And for me, it was kind of like, it was still pride, but it was like this upside down pride, this backwards pride, where it wasn't a sense of self-worth. For me, it was that I felt like God wasn't big enough and powerful enough to deal with the likes of me, right? And the reality is that we all have to overcome barriers that stand in the way of our belief and our healing. Maybe it's pride, like me, like Naaman. Maybe it's that we feel like we have to earn it. Maybe it's that we feel like we are worthy of it. Maybe it's denial, and it's that we think that we don't need it. Or maybe it's a fear of failure or fear of what other people will think about us. Maybe it's our stubbornness or the countless times where we think that we can deal with it on our own, in our own strength, that we can solve the problems of our life ourselves. But I'm here this morning to remind each one of us, myself included, that we all need this healing from God. And while it's not easy, it's simple. So here we're going to see that Naaman is going to get a little help from his friends, his servants. They talk some sense into him in this moment, and they say, dude, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have done it? How much more then when he tells you to wash and to be cleansed? Now, how many of you guys, by a show of hands, have ever been to the hospital or to the emergency room? Anybody? So most of you, right? Was that easy? Was that experience easy? Probably not. Was it cheap? Definitely not, right? I want you to imagine that time when you were in the emergency room, when you were in the hospital. And I want you to think about your experience. And now I want you to imagine that you go into the hospital. We'll say that you have a broken arm. We'll keep it kind of clean and PG, nothing too gory. You go into the hospital with a broken arm. You walk into the emergency room, and you go to the admissions desk. And the person at the admissions desk says, "You don't need to see a doctor. You don't need to see a nurse. I want you to walk across the lobby over there, go into the bathroom, wash your hands 7 times, and then you can go home. No copay, no bills, no doctors or nurses, no waiting. You can just do the thing and be healed." This is what Naaman has been told to do. How amazing is that news? And this is the second time that we see a servant in Naaman's life pointing him to the Lord, right? Giving him this good news. And these are the kinds of friends we need to be, right? We need to be like the servants in Naaman's life. These are the kinds of friends that we need in our lives. And I just want to ask, who is that for you? Who are you surrounding yourself with in your life that is helping you in this gospel journey? And how are you coming alongside someone else to help them? So we've seen the problem or the crisis. We've seen the solution. We've seen the conflict or the wrestle. Now we're going to come in for a landing. We're going to see what Naaman does, whether he does the thing or not. He does the thing. He washes 7 times. He is healed of his leprosy, but this is not the end of the story, right? We get more out of it. And Naaman, after he washes, after he heals, he is going to proclaim that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. And he does try to offer his gift to Elisha, who refuses it emphatically. And I think that Elisha refuses this gift so that it would be absolutely 100% clear that this healing, this transformation came from God alone. It wasn't a matter of Naaman's effort. It wasn't a matter of his gift. It wasn't a matter of even Elisha. Elisha doesn't even show up. God healed him. And then Naaman does something that's interesting, right? He goes to Elisha after he is healed. He offers his gift, as we just said. His gift is denied. And he says, "All right, then give me some dirt." Right? Give me some earth, as much earth as 2 mules can carry. And that seems weird to me, until you think about where he is and what his healing has done. It has taken him from a place of healing to a place of receiving an inheritance. He is quite literally taking hold of the land of promise, the inheritance of the people of God, and where the people of Israel had turned to other gods and had rejected him, this enemy of Israel has embraced Yahweh and the full restoration and cleansing and inheritance that God has to offer. He takes the dirt and he leaves with peace. And this is the story. This is the gospel. We may have so much to offer, but we are unclean. We need healing. We need Jesus. We may have wealth, we may have talent, we may have success stories in our life, but God asks for simple faith and obedience. Again, it's not easy, but it's simple. And he asks us to wash. not to make a payment and to wash, not to be worthy and to wash, but simply to wash. And here's the great news. We don't even have to do it perfectly. We don't have to do it 7 times on our own because Jesus has already done that. He's washed us perfectly through the cross, and through his resurrection, he has proclaimed that all who believe in him really have been made clean. They've been made whole. They've been made alive. And while Elisha doesn't come himself into Naaman's crisis, Jesus did. He came right into our midst personally, in the flesh, in order that we might be cleansed from our sin and our unrighteousness. Jesus is the greater Elisha. And I love the way God works in this story. He takes his people, he delivers them from slavery in Egypt through the waters and into an inheritance. And then an Israelite girl again finds herself a slave, a servant in a foreign land. And she offers a path to healing to a man who needs freedom from his affliction. And it is through the waters and into an inheritance that he finds it. This is our God.